the pleasant countryside, the fields of barley are ripening, and the hops are growing fast. Every day, the green stems cling their way up, an almost visible progress. Soon the quiet gardens will come alive with the swish of falling vines, with the soft murmur of distant conversation, with the tinkle of children's laughter. Throughout the night, the Oast fires will glow, and good beer will be drunk in many a tavern and alehouse. But let's begin at the beginning, and the beginning is a long time ago. It's as long ago, in fact, as the days of ancient Egypt, when malt liquor is known to have been brewed. Myth has it that the god Osirus told mankind the secret of its preparation. The date of its introduction to Britain has not yet been established, but it's known to have been drunk at the table of Edward the Confessor in the early part of the 11th century. 500 years later, it was still the favorite drink of palace and people alike. Many, many years ago, beer was brewed in monasteries, in homes, in institutions, and in the inns themselves. Some of these old brew houses remain, and in them can still be seen many of the 18th century implements. It was not until the 18th and 19th centuries that the big breweries, as we know them today, were established. Many still bear the names of their original founders, for brewing is a family as well as a friendly business. With the brewery companies rests the major responsibility of owning and the costly task of maintaining most of the inns of Britain. Now, brewing has become a major industry, vital to the nation's economy. The main raw material is, of course, barley. 12 million hundredweights are used every year for brewing. Its importance to the British farmer is enormous. Way back in the 17th century, the toast, "Here's health to the brewer and Godspeed the plough," linked the two together in appreciation of each's value to the other. In modern times, as the fields of barley ripen to harvest, the great combines appear. The maltster gets ready to receive the grain. Only the very best barley can be used for malting, and as we shall see later, the quality, the texture, and the type are all important to the finished beer. And now to the maltings themselves. Inside, the grain, which has been soaked in water, is allowed to germinate. At intervals, it is turned and respread to varying depths to allow the air to reach it and to control the natural rise in temperature. For centuries, wooden shovels have been used to avoid damage to the grain. But today, automation is coming into its own, and in modern maltings, the grain is turned by huge electrically powered machines. Another system employs large drum-like containers, which hold over 20 tons of barley and which may be rotated at will. The central control desk is elaborate enough for an ocean liner. But whether the newer methods or the older ones are used, as much skill and experience as ever go into the work of choosing and assessing the grain. Gradually, the grains begin to shoot. The process of turning the hard, starchy centers into sugary malt has begun. By experience alone, the maltster knows when the process of germination has gone far enough, and it's stopped by drying in a kiln. Hops, too, are essential. They, with barley, sugar, yeast, and water, all pure products of nature, are the only ingredients of British beer. Hops act both as flavoring and as a preservative. But it was not always so. It was not until the 15th century that hopped beer, with its bitter, distinctive tang, began to become popular. Hop growing is an all-the-year-round job. In the early part of the year, the gardens must be dressed and ploughed. In the spring, the strings, which have been left soaking, often in village ponds so that they fully shrink, are cunningly interlaced by skillful hands. Stilt men, too, are used for certain kinds of stringing. When the plants are above a foot high, they are trained around the strings in a clockwise direction, the opposite to runner beans. The unrequired shoots are pulled off. Then, in late August, the hop pickers arrive in their thousands, and the country villages are filled with excited people on a working holiday. They live for a 3-week period in huts, to which many of them return every year. It's a family job, however young, however old. There's a big bin to fill before the measurer comes round. Payment is by the bushel basket. Nowadays, machines are being used increasingly on farms. The bines are cut and taken to sheds where mechanical fingers pluck the oily cones. Immediately after picking, the hops go to the Oast where they are dried. Oil or anthracite fires are used, and the dryers stay on duty day and night, taking it in turns to sleep. After drying, the hops are compressed into large sacks called pockets, each marked with the grower's name and farm. Finally, away they go to the brewery, where these products of the land will be transformed into the cool, sparkling freshness of a glass of good beer. Inside the brewery are the polished shapes of mash tuns and coppers, and all the bewilderment of pipes and machinery for which the brewer has his own particular names. The malt room is where the brewing of beer rarely begins, for it is here that the character of each brew is decided. The various malts are blended to suit the variety to be brewed. It's an intricate job. Over 3,000 varieties of beer are produced to suit varying palates at home and overseas. The brewer relies on his own long experience, backed up by his laboratory staff, who test every sample before it's used. The next process is mashing. First, the malt is ground to a coarse powder or grist. Then it is mixed with hot water, always called liquor in the brewing trade. In the mash tuns, the process of changing the starch into energy-giving sugar, which began on the malting floor, will be completed. After a few hours, more hot liquor is used to wash the malt extract from the mash. Absolute cleanliness is essential. Bacteria must be kept out, so the inside of a modern brewery presents a quiet, covered look as the brewers move white-coated about their silent business. The malt extract, now known as wort, is pumped to the coppers. Here the hops and additional sugar are added in carefully determined proportions, different brews requiring different quantities. The mixture is boiled for another 2 hours. These huge coppers can hold as much as 10,000 gallons and are heated either directly or by steam. Meanwhile, the tons are being cleared out, ready for the next mashing. The malt residue is a valuable cattle food and is returned to the farmer. During the cleaning, it's possible to see the finely perforated floor through which the wort passes, leaving the insoluble residue behind. At every stage of the brewing process, samples are taken and analyzed. A far cry from the early days of hit and miss. Modern scientific methods began to be used in the early 19th century. Pasteur himself did much research into the subject. Some of it in the laboratory at a well-known brewery where the microscope he used is still treasured. His discoveries, particularly about bacteria and the action of yeast, have not only had a profound influence on the art and skill of brewing, but have proved of benefit to mankind throughout the world. By now, the wort, from which the spent hops have been removed, has been cooled meantime and passed to the fermenting vessels. Then the yeast is added. Yeast, a living organism, multiplies itself during fermentation, and many breweries are using the same strain as they used decades before. Now the excise officer appears, measuring quantity and strength so that duty can be charged. A duty which provides the exchequer with over £200 million every year. During a period of from 3 to 6 days, the yeast acts on the malt sugar, turning it to alcohol. For the first time, the brew is now beer. The brewer can tell by the various formations of the head how the fermentation is going. The surface alters hourly, changing color and shape. At intervals, the mixture is circulated. They call it rousing. Meanwhile, the casks are being prepared to receive their contents. Absolute cleanliness is essential. One spot of dirt can undo all the brewer's careful work. The outside as well as the inside of the cask is cleaned, and mechanical brushes do the job. Modern washing machines force steam into every corner and crevice. But lest the machine should fail, the final test is one of smell. Yes, he's called the sniffer. Metal casks are coming more into common use, but the art of cooperage is still essential, as it has been for centuries. The cooper's work is never done. There are casks to repair and casks to make. Years of apprenticeship must be served, and at the end of it, the young cooper must undergo the hardest part of his training, the initiation ceremony. In a barrel of his own making, filled with soot, shavings and beer, he's rolled from one end of the brewery to the other. About 60% of the beer sold in Britain is on draft. After a period of settling and conditioning, the beer passes to the racking or filling departments. The other 40% is sold in bottle or can and must be chilled and conditioned, which may take months or even years in the case of some brews. Then to the bottling stores, easily the busiest place in any brewery. From the automatic emptying of the crates of empty bottles, through the washing, the filling, the crowning, to the labelling, the work is done with only a little help from human hands. Everywhere there is an atmosphere of cleanliness. And so, in bottle, can, keg and cask, Britain's beer leaves the breweries of the country by dray, by rail and by tanker, destined for the pleasure and relaxation of the people of the country. For you and for me, and for those throughout the world who like British beer. For drinking by the fireside, or in the friendly atmosphere of the local, where the landlord completes the job which the brewer has done with such loving care. The drinking of beer and the inns of Britain are a national heritage, the one complementary to the other. It's a tradition built up over the centuries, a tradition of a good, healthy drink, well brewed and served, the enjoyment of which is a social occasion. And so the cycle begins again. In the pleasant countryside, the barley and the hops are growing fast. Soon the quiet gardens will come alive with the swish of falling bines, with the happy murmur of conversation. Throughout the night, the Oast house fires will roar, and good beer will be drunk deeply in many a tavern and alehouse. It is the beginning all over again.